Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the first of many events in today's Writing and Critical Inquiry AI and Writing Fair. As you can tell, we've had a slight change of plans, but I'm happy that we can at least all be together here and that Dr. Charles Logan is here to give the keynote. WCI faculty member Ian Singleton will introduce him after I offer a few remarks. For those who don't know me, I'm Allison Craig, and I'm the interim director of the program in Writing and Critical Inquiry. And I'd like to start us off by situating this conversation in writing. In particular, the misconceptions that abound about what constitutes academic writing. If you ask someone what it is, I can almost guarantee you'll be met with some variation of the following: writing that demonstrates proper grammar and syntax, writing in genre specific formats, think MLA, APA, Chicago, or my favorite, Turabian, writing that's objective, which means most of the writing is not your writing, but rather a collection of quotations from published academic essays. Writing that uses, quote, academic words. I've always found the idea of academic words strange. And by strange, I mostly mean exclusionary and gatekeeping. Yesterday, I asked Google AI what writing was, and here's what I got: a statistical, predictive, and structural task, not a creative, expressive, or intellectual one; formulaic and derivative, a tool for efficiency, lacking intent, meaning, or true understanding. In other words, and this is what it said, a form of bullshitting that mimics intelligence. The seminar in Writing and Critical Inquiry, or WCI as we call it, is an introduction to academic writing. WCI's motto is writing is thinking. AI can't think, so it simply can't produce what we're asking of students. So why concern ourselves with AI? As you'll see from today's programming, we have many, many reasons to concern ourselves with AI. However, as the director of a first year writing program, one of the most compelling, if unwanted, answers is that AI is giving us what we're asking for. We don't tell students to give us formulaic and derivative writing. We don't want them to prioritize surface and ignore substance. We certainly aren't asking for bullshit. And in fact, one of the reasons I eliminated page requirements in my classes was because if you're going to give me bullshit, give me less. And yet, something is getting lost in translation. This is where I think humans and AI are a little bit alike. One of my former students, Patrick, wrote about how large language models can't tell the difference between mouse as an animal and mouse as in computer mouse. People aren't so different sometimes. Even when we use the same language, words don't always mean the same thing. I think many, not all, but many of the misconceptions people have about what academic writing is, and therefore what AI produces, is because we teachers ask for one thing and grade another. We say we value process, but still overemphasize product. We get sucked into the trappings of academic writing at the expense of the purpose. Still, I can't help but be an optimist. I see AI as an opportunity to recalibrate and develop more inclusive writing pedagogies that truly value the thinking process and purpose of academic writing. Experts in writing instruction will tell you that writing is a social practice. Maybe what we can learn from AI is that writing is not only a social practice, but also a deeply human one. Academic writing isn't about the words you use. It's about finding the words that best help you understand and that best help you and others understand each other and the world around us. At its core, academic writing is a deep commitment to understanding for the purpose of making humane and well informed choices. Today's AI and Writing Fair is academic writing in action, and I hope you'll engage in that spirit.
Yeah, thank you. Claps. No cats so far. Um, okay, that was really interesting. So I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Charles Logan, who is the postdoctoral research fellow at Northwestern University's Center for Responsible Technology, Policy, and Public Dialogue. Prior to completing his doctorate in learning sciences at Northwestern University, Dr. Logan worked as a university educational technologist and high school English teacher. Dr. Logan's research explores ways for resisting, refusing, repurposing, and reimagining technologies for collective flourishing in schools and beyond. And I just want to add quickly that the pivotal concept idea that um, that I've learned from Dr. Logan, it has been transformative for my own thinking about AI. Please, Dr. Logan.
Well, thanks so much, Ian, for that introduction. And I'm really excited to be here with y'all today. As I said, it's a high school English teacher for most of my career. I was an English major. And so being around folks who think a lot about writing as process is really like I'm speaking to my people here. Um, I am going to be sort of pivoting away from writing in a way and talking about these pivotal concepts and the notion of the AI empire sort of prompt from Sarah and the students who I'm really excited to be in conversation with. So I have a few slides. I have to, let's see, send a request to share my screen. All right, let's see. Okay, I can do that now. All right. All right, can everybody see my screen? Okay. So again, really excited to be here talking about the AI empire and what that means for us as educators working in this time of generative AI in particular, and broadening the ways in which we're analyzing this technology and what it means at multiple scales, both in our classrooms, but in our communities, in our country, and our planet here. So I want to start with a story because I think a lot about how do we teach quote unquote AI literacy. And so I want to actually go back to the winter of 2024, in which Common Sense Media, a popular nonprofit, as a parent of three, I sometimes use them because they put out like movie reviews and sort of product reviews. Um, and Common Sense Media, an often trusted partner for educators, for caregivers, partners with OpenAI, and this comes from the language on their press release to quote, help teens and families safely harness the potential of artificial intelligence. And so, as someone who's curious about these kinds of partnerships, I wanted to know more. And so I was following this. This was, a multi-million dollar partnership. And then, so this is winter, maybe spring of 2024. Um, uh, Common Sense Media's or sister organization, Common Sense Education, releases an AI literacy curriculum for middle and high school students. And this is one of the slides from that curriculum. And this is meant to teach young people how AI learns. And as you see here, the text says the robot in the middle represents artificial intelligence. It's surrounded by people who are talking to it and showing it books. These people are the human, quote, trainers. And we have some smiling male presenting figures here, this sort of befuddled robot who's being shown these books. And if this was your base understanding of how AI learns, then I think you're missing. And I think I would argue may be intentional on the part of AI, because what OpenAI may not want young people to understand as they're, I would argue, socializing young people and educators into using these technologies, become lifelong product users, is that this is how AI and ChatGPT in particular was trained. And so we've seen a number of these stories, and we'll have a chance to talk more about this today. Um, this is from The Guardian from 2023. And the headline is "It's destroyed me completely. Kenyan moderators decry toll of training AI models." So OpenAI partnered with a third party, Samasource. And then we see the subtitle, right? Employees describe the psychological trauma of reading and viewing graphic content, low pay, and abrupt dismissals. So this is this global network of labor that really underpins all kinds of both social media. So you think about content moderators, but ChatGPT as well, and other large language models. These are very different framings of generative AI, right? So one, on the left, you have what I would argue a sort of captured educational material that aligns with the needs, the desires of industry, right? And this is a problem with AI literacy in general, right? Is oftentimes you have industry aligned or industry produced AI literacy lessons, even the notion of AI literacy, right? That assumes ultimately a kind of responsible user, right? Quote unquote. If with the right guardrails in place, right, we can use these technologies responsibly, ethically. I would argue that there really is not an ethical way to use generative AI. And so again, I think the contrast here is important. And um, what, how, and why we teach, and I would argue not just about, but against these technologies matters. And so we can think about, a notion of critical AI literacy perhaps would start to ask some questions, right? Is this an accurate portrayal of labor conditions? As we just saw, it is not. We can ask questions about who are these people? Where are they located? Under what conditions are they living and working? We can also ask other questions about the material. So where did these books come from, right? Did the writers, the artists, I just saw the cat, Allison. um, did they provide their consent for their intellectual property to be scraped by these companies to train their models? And so um, I want to sort of open up the aperture of our ethical sense making around these technologies. And one way we can do that is from folks in literacies education and the learning sciences, which is kind of where I situate myself in ed tech, critical ed tech studies. But oftentimes we think about platforms like Google Gemini or Anthropic's Claude, and we might focus on analyzing the content, right? That the prompts that you use, the text that is extruded from the models, right? That's that social level. Sometimes we might attend to technical levels around, let's say, the algorithms that are produced. Oftentimes, around the biases, right, that are in the data that get reproduced by the algorithms. But what I really want to focus on today, and I'm excited to talk to the students, is I think often either an ignored or kind of final slide, right, about the political economy of these technologies. Things like not only the labor that you see here, but also the environmental costs of training and maintaining these models, right? From the rare earth minerals that are mined to, these convoluted supply chains to the actual cloud servers that are stored in data centers, right? That cloud, we're doing a lot of work because they are not immaterial in the sky, but rather very much material of the earth. And so, to kind of map this for us, I want to think about um, how we might expand to a topographical approach. So rather than focus sort of on this more narrow output, or which is, I think, sort of normative discourse around AI technologies, this is where I really, as a reader, encountered this sort of global perspective in the work of Kate Crawford, and that it allows us, I think, new and important avenues of analysis and intervention when we think about our relationship with these technologies and how we want to use them or not use them. Um, and so to kind of map this out, then we see from a work by Anna Valdivia what this kind of AI empire looks like. And we see that right from the mining of rare earth minerals, both in China, in Central Asia, in Africa, what then get right shipped to Taiwan to create the graphic processing units, the GPUs, that then get shipped back to the United States, where NVIDIA, right, is selling these hardware pieces to eventually, right, be sort of dumped in different locations in the global South. And that's some terminology that I think the students will pick up on too, as we think about, how this system of extraction really mirrors and is a continuation of historical European and American colonialism across the world. And so when we start to think about these technologies as reproducing logics and relationships of colonialism, I think it raises the stakes of using these technologies in ways that are often either under theorized or ignored altogether. Another way we can think about these technologies as the AI empire is not just these processes of supply chain, but also the ideologies in which these technologies are rooted. from racial capitalism to heteropatriarchy to white supremacy to, again, the sort of central focus of today on modernity and coloniality, and in which those ideologies then become imbued in and sort of control, right, the ways in which these technologies are actually deployed against populations, both here in the United States, right? We can think about all the unrest and uprising in Minneapolis and elsewhere, right? In words like surveillance, right? Datafication, this biometric profiling, in which you have our current administration sort of weaponizing these technologies against the populace here. But that's been happening and continues to happen all around the world as elements of an interconnected AI empire. And so someone who I sort of turn to as a North Star to sort of think about these issues is Dr. Ruha Benjamin. And I think this quote captures the lived reality that we're participating in right now, is that she says, we are in many ways trapped inside the lopsided imagination of those who monopolize power and resources to benefit the few at the expense of the many. And what I really appreciate about the work of Dr. Ruha Benjamin is that she helps us really sharpen our analytical skill set to think about the ways in which these technologies are impacting us in education, but across different domains. And it's both an invitation to attend to these imaginations and how they're being instantiated in these technologies in different policies, and to dream and imagine and enact otherwise. And I think that's an important piece for us to hold on to, is that despite all of the extractive labor practices, despite the environmental harms, there is active resistance that is occurring. And so, for example, I think often, and this was true in the paper that the students read, the global South is, and the workers and the folks who sort of are living in the global South are positioned as powerless, are positioned often in sort of a deficit framing. And it's important to recognize all the ways in which people are fighting back. So this is a project, the Workers Inquiry Project, in which you see here. It's a research project. It's a global, radically participatory research project spanning these 9 countries and 5 continents, where data workers are sort of telling their story, and they're telling it in conjunction with researchers in order to improve um, their labor conditions, in order to share their experiences in all kinds of multimedia ways, right? And so again, we think about writing, not just the written word, right, but how we can sort of open up our ways in thinking about communicating to others with zines, documentaries, comics, essays, podcasts, animations. This is a really wonderful set of learning material. So if folks are interested, I would recommend checking this out. And I think the other thing I would say too, in reading the paper that the students read too, and sort of the isolating the global North and global South as geographies, I think also misses that the logics of colonialism ignore geography often, and it's more about those relationships and the systems that are set up. And so that's happening in the United States as well. But also, we see this upswell of resistance to, in particular, that the construction of hyperscale data centers that are kind of the backbone of not just the internet, but our required kind of hardware for generative AI. And we see, particular minoritized communities, Black communities across the United States fighting back. And I think this framing is important, right? Black community members said they are fighting a new wave of extraction, right? That it is a new wave that continues, right? Decades, hundreds of years of exploitation. And so, again, I think it's important to recognize that this AI colonialism is not just happening elsewhere; it's happening here in the U.S. And that it's important to also recognize the agency and the power of people and how they're exercising that agency and power to say no and to refuse the sort of build out of these technologies in their communities and in their lives. And so, with that, I think one thing we can start to do is ask these skeptical questions. What are the costs of creating these technologies? Who bears those costs? Whose needs and interests are served by this technology and whose are not? I don't know if anybody saw, there's some ridiculous quote from Sam Altman, the CEO or the founder of OpenAI, the other day, where he kind of makes this comparison between um, children and AI models, and that like, oh yeah, AI models require a lot of energy, but so do humans. You have to feed them for 20 years before they become smart. And I think that um, is such a tell about whose needs these technologies serve, and also the way in which these tech bros are thinking about humanity, which to me is a pretty paltry vision. And questions like how does using this technology cause people to think or act differently? So that's certainly, I think, important for us as we think about writing and the impacts of these technologies on writing, on our own imagination, our own process of thinking, and then also which of the changes brought by this technology are desirable and or not, and for whom. These technologies are not neutral. No technology is neutral, and we have to think about the politics of these technologies and how they're impacting us, the pedagogies of these technologies and how they're impacting us as educators. So with that, I just want to say thank you for the chance to sort of share some opening thoughts. I'm excited to be in conversation with Katie and PJ today.
Yeah, excellent. Lots of clapping, I see. Zoom clapping in silence. Um, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Logan. Excellent. So, um, I will now introduce Katie Ann O'Gallagher, who is a junior in history and an English major with minors in film and gender studies. They have attended the U Albany's WCI talk-in, or uh, sometimes we call those write-ins as well, regarding the use of artificial intelligence in schools, and has also done research in the ties between AI and colonialism. As someone who majors in the humanities, Katie is concerned about the influence generative AI has on writing, education, human rights, and the environment. So all of this, we're all in good company, right? As you were saying earlier, Dr. Logan. All right, Katie. So glad that you've come into our program, Katie. Please.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you to Dr. Logan and Allison Craig for all the words you said before. I couldn't agree more with everything that was being said. I'm going to expand upon some points that were previously stated. And yeah, I'll get right into kind of what I have written down here. I just want, I'm going to start probably with my body paragraph, because a lot of the context that I get into was thankfully given by Dr. Logan, but I am going to kind of talk a bit about, start off with some thoughts about our modern way of looking at colonialism, because I think we have, especially since the 1700s, have seen a great shift in who are our colonial actors, I would say. So while governments definitely still like of what we talk about the global north, which Dr. Logan greatly pointed out is not just like a geographical line, because we see the United States colonial project of our United States government enacting its colonial policies not only against other countries, but in our own country itself with the indigenous Black communities, and now especially with the Latino communities as well now. But, yeah, but I just wanna point what I'm gonna talk a lot about is the colonial actors of private corporations, which definitely go hand in some of the major countries of the global north, especially the United States. But we're kind of seeing with this modern colonialism how a lot of it is enacted by private corporations, and what I'm gonna be talking a lot about is big tech. So, like, the Amazon, Meta, Google, etcetera. And then, yeah, then lastly, the other note that I just want to add before I get to reading what I have is I think what I assume what a lot of people are talking about when I'm using AI generally, but I'm talking about generative AI, the work of Meta, OpenAI, ChatGPT, Gemini, which I assume is what everyone else is here also talking about. But just for letting know when I say AI, I'm referring to the generative AI. So yeah, I'm starting in my um second paragraph here. And it's just what I want to start off my first point is I think a very important point that I think students and maybe some people get confused on is that AI is not as smart or as independent as people fear or think it to be. A lot of AI generations that Dr. Logan also brought up are done due to the immense labor done by humans. In an article by Dr. Salvador Regli, I believe is how do you say it? Titled Artificial Intelligence, Colonialism, Environmental Damage, Labor Exploitation, and Human Rights Crises in the Global South. He outlined, and I quote, AI, despite its advanced capabilities, depends on human input, often outsourced to low-wage regions due to significant international wage disparities. The AI that, like, I'm aware that students use knows how to solve like a math problem it gives it because a human trained it to solve complex math problems, not because the AI simply knows how to do it. AI is not conscious and cannot simply know anything. And another article that emphasizes this point, might pronounce the name wrong, by Danina Mij and Britta Schneider, in their article, The Material Making of Languages as Practice of Global Domination and Control, Continuations from European Colonialism to AI, also states that today's AI language culture is based on digitalization and the application of machine learning. This involves the availability of large masses of data, which mostly have been gained through the internet. Nothing AI creates has ever been original. All the responses generative AI make are a strange hybrid of all the information the AI has found on the internet. The answers, well, answers I say in quotes because AI gives a lot of false information, but or correlates with whatever inquiry or prompt a person has given the generative AI. And this technology is trained by humans. The AI knows how to scan the internet because a human has went and gone and done that. The humans that are employed to do this, as brought up with the Guardian article that Dr. Logan showed in his presentation, are usually humans from the global south. And not only are they not well compensated for their work, the work of training AI is a grueling and prolonged process, which on the surface it may seem that training AI may seem like a simple task, but it takes a lot of time since the internet is filled with a mass of data and it can be potentially harmful. Similarly to um, Dr. Salvatore Regin in his article also brings up the abuses that have done by particularly workers in Kenya, done by um, tech giants like Facebook and Google. His exact quote is that tech giants like Facebook and Google have outsourced content review tasks to Kenyan workers who are responsible for monitoring and filtering user-generated content to ensure compliance with community standards. However, this work comes with significant ethical concerns. Kenyan content moderators are often exposed to graphic, violent, or disturbing material, which can lead to severe psychological trauma. Kenyan workers and many other workers in the global south who work at AI data centers undergo the extreme mental torment due to the long and constant exposure of graphic content for non-livable compensation. This is just one example of the array of human rights abuses private technology companies commit against their workers to train a technology that is not the major advancement that these companies advertise it to be. As what I previously stated, that a lot of things that AI can do, humans can do. It just does it quicker and most of the time not as efficient as humans would do it. And these private companies have their hands in these countries due to the long history of colonialism and how countries of the global north have destabilized a lot of countries in the global south, resulting in their core infrastructure and economy, which makes these global south countries turn to these private corporations because the private corporations gives them some financial compensation to keep their countries afloat due to the long history of destabilization done by the global north, and which allows these private corporations to get away with long abusive hours, non-livable wages, and also allows them to have these Kenyan workers and a lot of others go through really graphic content without um, healthcare benefits or anything like that to help them ease the PTSD they gain from looking at this content. But of course, that is not the only horrific thing that these private corporations have with their creation of AI data centers and their work in AI. There's also these centers are also greatly damaging the countries in the global south's environments and the world's environment as a whole. Regime also writes, data centers and the mining of rare minerals both generate substantial greenhouse gas emissions, accelerating the pace of climate change. Scientists for decades have been warning the world about the impending doom of climate change, yet companies like the big tech companies continue destroying the planet for capitalist gain, as we have seen for so long. And yeah, and then as with the quote that I said from Logan, these data centers put a lot of greenhouse gas emissions into our planet, which, as we know, destroys like our ozone layer, things that we very much need. But they also suck up a lot of water and taking a lot of clean water from these countries that, with their poor infrastructure, greatly need. Well, obviously, every human needs clean water. So not only they're taking that away from the citizens of these countries, but they're also with tied to the long, grueling hours, also committing human rights workers abuses against them as well. So yeah, and climate change particularly has shown particular damaging effects on the environments across the world, but particularly the most vulnerable are those countries in the global south. Due to the long historical exploitation of these countries, resulting in poor infrastructure to combat climate change disasters. And yeah, I say all this that I know a lot of people argue that this is the cost of technological advancement. Yet, just because this is the history of technological advancement we've seen in the past does not mean we should set this cruelty as our norm. There is a long history of abuse and exploitations of countries in the global south by countries in the global north and the private technology corporations and other corporations based in the global north as they continue this historical narrative of abuse by putting their data centers in these exploited countries and committing many human rights violations against workers from these countries. And of course, the added negative of the environmental costs these data centers are having on our planet. But all of this damage for a technological advancement that, as I previously mentioned, is not the advancement these companies advertise it to be. Um, yeah, because what AI can do can be done and has been done by humans. So leads me to my last thing is that I think discussing the harm that generative AI data centers cause is important because this colonial cycle of abuse has been our past and is currently our present, but does not have to be our future. It can end. A better reality is possible and affordable, as we've seen with the billions of dollars that these companies and the super rich elite have made off these data centers. So the money, there's always a debate about the affordability of things, but the money is out there and this colonial cycle of abuse can end. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie, for that those insightful observations and sort of challenges for us to think about our own kind of responsibility to our fellow humans, to our more than humans, lands and waters in which we move. And so I had a chance to read Katie's piece ahead of time, and I noticed that in the entire text there was one phrase that you had put in all caps and that you then emphasized with an exclamation point, and that just drew my curiosity. So I'm curious. The phrase was "Nothing AI creates is original!" Exclamation point. And so I'm curious of you think about this as a writer. Why did you feel like that was the point that you wanted to emphasize across the entire piece? Why was that important for you to communicate shout it out to the world?
Yeah, I think because I love to emphasize this point of AI's lack of originality because there's kind of like a wicked irony there. This abuses that we see going on has been done by tech companies before. I'm sure people know, but the cobalt in our phones is mined in the Congo. So there's Apple and a lot of other phone companies have committed human rights abuses as well as Google, Meta, which has done with AI. And I'm not, of course, not to compare, which obviously all human rights abuses are horrible. But the thing that's kind of the wicked irony with AI is that it kind of has no use. I guess you can make the argument that at least my phone is useful. AI has no originality. As I previously mentioned, everything that AI does is trained by humans and can probably be done better by humans. So I emphasize that point because of this. There's so much time and money these tech companies put into AI for a technology that I've, as I've stated in the article, as I've have personally seen, does not add any useful benefit to our current society as we have it.
And thank you for that. And I think my follow-up question, which I shared with you previously, is a nice transition from what you were just saying. Because, like, yeah, I have my iPhone here too, and so I think one line of critique when I share these or talk about these issues, a rebuttal that I hear as well. Um, Compared to other industries, data centers don't take up as much water, electricity. People point to agriculture or fast fashion or traveling on an airplane. And so I'm curious, you know, these sort of whataboutisms, as a rhetorical, rebuttal, like how would you then counter? And he's, I think, started to allude to it a bit in what you were just saying there. But how do you think about sort of generative AI in a kind of ecosystem of other exploitative technologies that, again, many of us rely on for one thing or another.
Yeah. I definitely like in conversation, especially with students, because I have personally noticed the kind of, well, my own concern with seeing my peers' reliance on generative AI and have these discussions in the classroom. There is always this whataboutism about what about you still use your phone, you still use your laptop, you purchase stuff like from H&M that's made in like Vietnam, and there's all these discussions. It's very hard to live. I understand it's very hard to live outside of the colonialism world that we have or try to exist. And obviously, all the human rights abuses done by any corporation, fast fashion, fast food, is horrific. And there is there is work that being done by people across the globe to end um, these workers' abuses. And of course, I stand with all that. Um, and I think kind of the thing where I bring up, particularly with AI, is kind of back to this like there's no true purpose of it, and that yeah, like there's because you don't need, unfortunately, with our digitalized society, need my phone to get in contact with my mother. Like there's things like that, and not that necessarily people need fast fashion, but unfortunately, a lot of the cases, sometimes if you are low on a budget, so sometimes the only clothes you can afford are like from Shein or from those big corporations that do exploitive labor. So but at the end of the day, no one needs AI to function in our society. Everything that has been being done in our classrooms that I've seen students use for AI have been done by humans before, and has been, yeah, so it has been done by humans before. And then also, I think like also with the whataboutism is that there's ways to kind of redo our reliance. If you can afford clothes, like if you can afford to go thrifting or afford clothes that are not highly manufactured, I would encourage people to do that. I've seen a lot of people say when it comes to the phones, like don't buy the latest new Apple phone. Wait until your phone is pretty, like you can't use it anymore. Like you don't need the latest phone, because that only encourages Apple to continue their like abuses in the Congo, etc. So there are ways, just even though we live in our colonial digitalized society, there's ways to combat it. And I think one of the ways is to not use generative AI, that these companies are continuing their human rights abuses for these data centers. So,
Yeah, I appreciate that resonates. I think it's sort of to what ends are we using generative AI, right? To produce more AI slop. Arguably, we don't need any AI slop versus, right? You do need to stay in touch with your network, right? You do need clothing, you do need to eat. And I think that also raises the question of different forms of resistance and refusal, which is something I'm really interested in at different scales. Because I think, and I'm excited to talk to you too, PJ, about this when it's time to chat. But I feel like there's often this kind of tension. And I've seen kind of critiques around the notion of an analogy that, big oil produced the carbon footprint to shift responsibility onto individuals for their use of carbon producing materials and other things. So, just have to attend, we're going to recycle our way out of climate change, right? And so I'm wondering about how you think about sort of pushing back, and you started to unpack this a little bit. But what recommendations would you have for us gathered today about how that sort of resistance and refusal of AI hype, of the narrative that these technologies are inevitable, that as young people, and even as more mature people, I'm 41. We need to learn these technologies because our jobs are dependent on them, right? We're going to be left behind if we don't learn how to integrate these technologies into every aspect of our lives. Um, what thoughts might you share about what kind of that resistance and refusal might look like on an individual level, but also recognizing that the kind of atomization of that resistance, I think ultimately is what big tech companies would prefer versus kind of more collective organizing and sort of bringing folks together in sort of networks of resistance. So I'm curious, given your own lived experience, given the reading and the writing that you've been doing, the thinking you've been doing, the readiness thinking you've been doing. What would you recommend we kind of do about these technologies in our lives to resist and refuse them at those different scales?
Yeah, I think I did that kind of very much what you brought up with the whole thing with climate change and big oil kind of pushing the blame on the individual. Because we kind of see that in various ways. It's not that individuals can't do anything, because of course I do firmly believe in like the impact that you can do on such an individual level. Like even like for example, even in regards to AI, like one less generative AI user, even though there's probably millions, still I would I argue does something because there's I like encouraging my fellow students or encouraging because well sorry let me get my thoughts in order, but yeah, I think first on a basic level is talking to the people around you um and kind of sharing information, because I think if people are more educated on what these data centers are doing on like the example with Kenya and a lot of stuff going on, I do firmly believe people would move away from it. I know I'm in my junior level, like there's was a time with my classmates that we did not use AI. That time existed, and I'm sure with with older people, like there was a time for using or creating like AI slob, like that time existed. But I also understand the struggle because I, even though I'm in the humanities, which I've seen it's been kind of divided on the AI issue, mainly against AI. But I've had assignments where professor asked me specifically to go look at AI, and there's or to do something in regards. It was in an educational context. It wasn't just like generate AI slop, but there is AI coming into the education and work phase, and that can't simply be ignored. Um, and it kind of with that, I think it's one always have a dialogue. Like in this specific class, there was a discussion about AI, and I voiced my own opinions, and but also just look. I have not done more research. I want to look more into this because there are potentially other AIs that are not from the big techs, Meta, Google. I know one particular, I'm not sure if it's connections. It might be connected to OpenAI because a lot of these corporations own a lot of smaller stuff. But for my particular assignment, I went to, I believe it was Poe or something, where it does show you the sources of where it got its information, which I think is something valuable, because something that Allison Craig brought up before is that we don't have to necessarily live in a anti-AI world. I think as of right now, because of its human rights abuses, I will not touch AI, and I kind of encourage people to not touch at least the major AIs. Um, but if there is a time where we can have these data centers, um, not suck up the water, maybe have advanced technology to work on how to have these more sustainable data centers, more laws against human rights abuses. We don't have to necessarily push AI away ever. It could help in research the way like with Poe AI shows, like can have someone like generate my list of sources so I can do research quicker. But as I said, like as it stands right now, I personally would not touch AI because of its human rights violations. But I think, yeah, on an individual level and even in the worker educational level, these discussions are very vital because more people need to know what's going on, and then we could see more action to delve from there. And then the last thing I'll say when it comes to collective resistance, there is, I think, protests going to the streets. It's always been something I've been passionate about, and I forgot where, particularly in the United States, but there was a recent AI data center was gonna be built somewhere. I forgot where I just saw this article, but people showed up to the streets, people were against it, and the AI data center building was canceled, and they're actually building a park instead. So, I think showing up and letting these 'cause, letting these corporations or governments know that this is not the future we want, I think does have an impact, and I think to tie the last thing I will say back into, like, being one less gen AI user, talking to people around me, potentially creating less stuff because when it comes to these corporations, like, you have to hit them, like, in their pockets, basically. If no one's using their product, they're not gonna invest more time and money in waste, because even though these corporations have so much money, they're very cheap. I mean, we could see that that's why they're turning towards the to abuse the Global South because they that saves them the most money, even though they have billions of dollars. So if you kind of hit them where their pockets are and not use their product or don't buy, like, the latest Apple phone, I think that also does, can hopefully encourage these corporations to maybe go the right way or the more just way, I would say.
I appreciate the optimism, and an invitation to think creatively about what that resistance and refusal looks like in collective, kind of participation in civic life, right? I mean, you're talking about different organizing that's been happening around data centers across both the United States as well as the entire world. But also thinking about how do you kind of reimagine what different socio-technical relations look like. Maybe it's setting up a repair cafe right on campus where people can come and if you have a busted device, right, to sort of use the collected knowledge of a place in Albany or neighboring communities say we don't need to just dump our e-waste. Let's think about how might we come together to maintain these products together, to share them. Right. I'm old enough to remember when my elementary school, we had like a computer lab, right? And those were the computers were, and you went down and you learned your typing and you played some number crunchers or math. I can't remember the math game that I used to play. And this was before like ed tech was just like one big data extraction. And so I think there's a way to kind of um, not romanticize the past, but think about the ways in which these technologies weren't disruptive in a way that was more sort of a collective approach that we might take forward into the coming years. I know you have to leave soon, Katie. I just want to open up to questions from people other than myself in the final sort of 5-ish minutes, 7 minutes that we have before Katie needs to go to class. Unless Katie, you're ready to head to class, or I'll I'll maybe turn it to Ian. How you want to transition?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say exactly that. You know, Katie is going to be leaving us pretty soon because they're a student and they have to go to class. So, any questions directly to Katie or to the conversation between Katie and Dr. Logan would be appreciated. You can type them into the chat. Um, I have one myself, but I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance before Katie you end up leaving us. Okay, can I ask my question? I'll make it quick. It has to do with what both of you discussed. This idea of whataboutism, I think, is significant. Um, Sarah is here with me and said it's a straw man argument, but it nonetheless is an argument people are making. Do you do your criticisms? I know the answer to this question, but I'm still presenting it. Are your criticisms about shaming all of us so that we won't use AI because of the negative impacts of it? Or are they about accountability, holding these companies accountable for the things that they're doing in the world, holding them accountable to the values that we bring to them as tools that we bring as users of these tools? So does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, I'm just I believe I understand what you're saying. It's kind of like it's the route to shame the individual or kind of hold these companies accountable. And even though, as I might contradict myself here, but even though I've said that I think the work of the individual and is very important, I think I encourage the people around me, people in this talk, to turn away from generative AI. I don't think like going around and booing people who say they use AI or booing my classmates when they say they use it for assignment is necessarily going to have the effect that I want. So I think like holding these companies accountable is the way to do it. And I think also one of those ways to do that is to not use their product or just try to stay away from their product. But I know how to generative AI in a way is like I don't blame people kind of turning for it. Can use a personal example. My um sister is neurodivergent. She struggles with writing. She's very much a more science math brain, where I'm the complete opposite with the humanities. And I know she's turned to AI because she struggles with writing and she can't formulate her thoughts, and I don't necessarily blame that on her. That's I'm not gonna delve too deep into this, but I think it's also kind of the way our education system, like, I think there's the way people turn to AI or people that struggle with writing. It's kind of like our education particularly leaves neurodivergent people behind in some ways and doesn't kinda give them the help they need the way we have it set up. So, it's like, I don't yeah, I don't blame her for turning to generative AI. It's an easy, quick thing, and she needs to get an assignment done. And I don't blame students who have their own deadlines, who maybe work part-time jobs and needs to get this assignment done. I don't think the fault is the individual. Um, but yeah, but I also think there is individual stuff that can be done. There's stuff that can be done at individual level, but I think the main goal is to always hold these companies accountable. Like with the article from the Guardian, more news sources reporting on what's going on to and like yeah, more news sources reporting on what's going on, etc. And I think that's the way to do it. um I'm looking at the time, but I truthfully can linger on for a bit longer because all I have to do is switch to another Zoom because of the snow, so I'm okay. But yeah.
I really appreciate that, Katie, for lots of reasons. One, I think, is to recognize that we have to situate every learning environment and every person within that environment. So we were thinking about if a disabled student is using an AI technology, and this is where it's important to like also unpack. It may be generative AI, but like text to speech, right, is a machine learning tool, an AI tool, and to recognize there is a kind of a multitude of AI technologies, and to recognize too that people have different needs, and so we're not dismissing those out of hand, certainly. Um, and so I think that's really important. And I also just really appreciate your point of sort of thinking about this. And this kind of happened during the height of COVID. And then, we kind of forgot about it. And now I think, generative AI presents us with this opportunity again to sort of rethink. And I imagine you're doing all this at your university. I know mine is like, why are we here? What is it's a very sort of existential question of like, what's the purpose of higher education, right? If all of a sudden we have this tool that can produce bullshit, um, you know, how do we kind of push back against more instrumental, sort of neoliberal visions of technology and learning that is just this is job preparation while also maintaining, right, that yes, it's important that we prepare young people to enter the workforce and to thrive, but that thriving, particularly now in 2026, requires, I think, an attention to um, questions of politics and ideology and the kinds of worlds we want to create and sustain. And I guess the last point too is I think it's important to consider like where the movement from individual to those in power I think we don't have to move from individual to corporation, because that also feels to me quite intimidating. Like I don't think Mark Zuckerberg or Sam Altman or Elon Musk are kind of they have no shame to go back to what you were saying. Um, and so I think we can think about where are the powerful people in our institutions, for example, who might be replicating or reproducing industry lines or narratives or logics that we might want to push back against, individually, collectively, so that when we see sort of AI hype being reproduced in a new initiative to do this or that, or that framing, and this maybe gets to your question a little bit, Susan, of you know, raising questions in conversations, whether it's in a department meeting, in meetings with our students, to the extent that you feel comfortable. I mean, I also am quite aware of the hierarchical nature of higher ed, and that people who have less power, right, may not be able to speak out. But those of us who do possess power in the ways that we do, I think we can exercise that power to do that kind of reframing of these technologies, and not just to come down on more kind of normative discourse around, again, responsible use, but to do some really deep ethical sense making and wrestling with our colleagues, with our students, to sort of think about what are the ways in which we may want to find uses for these technologies, under what circumstances, right? Might they make sense? But also to realize that resistance and refusal isn't just about saying no. In my mind, it's also an invitation to think otherwise, and then pursue that sort of vision of education, or visions of education, along with colleagues, along with students, that can sort of push back against these technologies and create new spaces of thinking and learning, of writing, of being in community with one another, at this time that kind of attends to, right, all these power dynamics that we've been talking about, and that, Katie, you've written and spoken so eloquently about today.
Uh, yeah, I completely agree with everything you're saying. Like, I think the person to corporation is a big jump. Is a big jump. There's always in between people. With even going from us to federal government, there's state institutions, local institutions, stuff like that as well. Um, yeah, and also I think kind of a thing that I find myself writing in a lot, especially my history papers, is a lot of problems in our society can either go back to colonialism, white supremacy, or patriarchy, and all how they kind of interconnect. So, like stuff with AI, and if there's kind of, I see some questions asking about this, but if there's a way to um, turn to generative AI, does it have to be gone forever? Like I said, I don't think it does. I think if we tackle like would say like the big three problems of our world. Um, I think with these, because there is, I would truly believe there is could be a reality that is post colonialism. Even though we say we're in a post colonial world, we're in like neo colonialism now. But I think there is a way to exist out of these social institutions, social oppressive institutions, and I think generative AI can exist outside of them. I'm not necessarily there with, like, the technology base, and if there's a way to better create data centers that doesn't suck up our water or put greenhouse gas emissions, I'm not sure. I'm not in that field with the technology, but if we have the technology to create data centers, I feel humans are smart enough to make, a way to better, more efficient or less environmental damaging data centers. Um, but yeah, to get to the questions see from Professor Cumming. How can humanities students have conversations with students in majors that are encouraging or pushing AI, such as business? How can these oh my god, sorry. How these conversations extend to professors in those areas that are pro AI without discussing colonial aspects? Is there a student right to know about the back end in this industry? To answer the last question, definitely. I think it's a every human who is either forced to use generative AI in the work or in the educational space, but everyone should know what these companies are doing and anything, any big tech companies, like even if you go to like Amazon's human rights abuses against its workers, like people should be well informed about what goes on in our world. So I think, and then students, I would say have a right if we're entering into a new phase of education where AI is being incorporated. students definitely need to know that, what goes on in these industries. And then with the first question, how to have these conversations, I think it's just kind of approaching it with both perspectives. And I think something like kind of brought up before to answer the previous question, it doesn't necessarily have to be a hostile conversation, even though I know people who are pro or anti AI have very strong stances. I have seen it kind of get a bit hostile in the classrooms on some when it comes to opposing sides. But I think because I feel like there is a way that generative AI is helpful. Like from the humanities, I've seen students who have used it to summarize their source to get their sources listed and to help them find them. I've seen it done before. And I know with business students, it's probably helps them with research or something with stats. That's a really vague generalization since I'm not in business. But I think there's a way to have these conversations and kind of talk to even um, with pro AI professors, kind of see, like, is it the way they're turning to it is because it's easier? Or and I even bring up the questions like, since we're turning to generative AI simply because it does it easier, are we losing valuable skills? I think me searching, like, even though we've passed the days of actively having to go to the library to find stuff, but even just searching articles on Google Scholar, having to read articles, decide which one works for your thesis, I think is an important skill that people are kind of losing through the reliance with AI. And I think the same question with business, are you choosing AI to do your stats? Is that you losing the skill to do it yourself? So I think that's also an important conversation to have. And then just quickly, yeah, what with the other question, what purpose do you think generative AI should serve in society as it continues to grow and receive more interest and development? Um, I think yeah, I think well, I'm very, very anti-AI. I don't know if that's come off yet, but that's where my initial thing is kind of like to say there is no purpose, but I also don't think this technology has become way too popular and way too embedded in our society already that I don't think we can go completely cast it aside, even though I argue it has kind of, as of this stands, no use. But with a lot of technologies, like the way computers, phones have like better our instant communication, like we don't have to write letters anymore. I think um, there is that conversation to go back to quickly is that with generative AI helps that makes us do stuff quicker. Are we losing valuable skills in that process? Or is it just a way with technology to help us, you know, live our lives more efficiently? There is that kind of debate. And I think generative AI in some cases, I don't um, necessarily have an exact example. So, like, there could be ways generative AI helps us just live more efficiently, the same way phones and other technologies that we have has helped us live more efficiently. So, I'm not against completely throwing generative AI. I am sorry. I'm not necessarily for completely throwing generative AI away because it's already here. We can't ignore it. But yeah, I think there could be um, valuable uses to it in the future.
Katie, thank you for your brilliant, sorry, can you hear me okay? Thank you for your brilliant précis, and thank you for furthering this discussion. It's a fascinating conversation. I'm Sarah Garagosian. I know at this time, Katie, you may need to leave, but I want to take a minute to introduce my student. Um, last semester, I had the pleasure of working with Pride Joy Chitolie, who also goes by PJ. He's from St. Lucia, and is a business and finance major graduating in the class of 2028. He loves learning new things and helping others. I was very taken by PJ's research on AI colonialism and the attendant human rights abuses in the production of AI. And so I'm going to invite PJ now to talk about his research essay.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you very much. I like to say that you guys did a very good job of exaggerating how I think like terrible AI is towards the world, and you guys had a very good conversation, very entertaining, very. I learned a lot. I think adds on to what I already know, what my research taught me. I learned something new also. But to basically get into what I'm gonna say, I would just like to add that I kind of have a different perspective than than what was previously being spoke about because I'm a business finance major. It's kind of like it's been taking over the industry now. Like the industry is mostly just like AI. you go into the field and it's kind of like these jobs are now looking for people who's okay with working with AI, who's okay with like incorporating AI into their daily basis and stuff like that. So I kind of like have a different perspective as to not wanting to just take AI fully out of the system, but find a way around it. That's one thing. Another thing I'll say is that AI is actually like I feel like it's in our daily life every single day. I realize that every time I do a search on Google, I'm not sure if this could be taken out or not, but every time I do a search on Google, it comes up and it says AI supported search or AI search, and it gives a summary of what I just searched up. So no matter what I do, is somehow there's AI somewhere. No matter where I go, there's always AI in my path. So that's one thing I like to add, that we all somehow use AI, even though we like don't realize it sometimes. Um, and one more thing is that I personally think that what should be done is not it should be taken out, but I feel like we should find a way around it. The answer is within the AI itself. We could simply ask it. I did that for my last semester. I can't remember exactly what the answer was, but I did it last semester during class, and I kind of searched up what the answer would be if we asked AI what would be the solution if we used it to kind of fix the problem. But to get into what I wrote, I kind of had a summary wrote. I'm not gonna read my entire uh research, but I'm just gonna have a summary kind of. So I started by saying artificial intelligence has become a modern form of colonialism, concentrating wealth and technological power in the global north while exploiting labor, resources, and environments in the global south. Artificial intelligence, or AI, is defined by IBM as technology that allows computers to simulate human learning, problem solving, creativity, and decision making. AI has transformed everyday life. It answers our questions, generates content, and helps business operate more efficiently. But behind this innovation lies a growing ethical crisis. One major issue is environmental damage. According to research cited by Dr. Salvador Sancio F. Regime, I believe, train, train, train a single AI model can emit over 284,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide, the equivalent of 5 cars' lifetime emissions. The production of AI hardware requires mining rare minerals, often in countries in the global south. This extraction damages land, increases carbon emissions, and worsens climate change in our vulnerable regions. Large corporations build data centers in countries with lower energy costs, benefiting financial while local communities face environmental degradation. Another serious concern is labor exploitation. AI systems rely heavily on human workers for tasks like data labeling and content moderation. Many of these workers are located in low-income regions and are paid extremely low wages, sometimes as little as $1.50 per hour. They are often exposed to disturbing content for long hours with little psychological support. These workers form the backbone of AI systems, yet they remain invisible and underpaid. AI is also transforming the job market. While it creates opportunities in technology and software development, it is seamlessly replacing jobs such as content writers, paralegals, travel advisors, and graphic designers. Many workers are forced to retrain and return to school or take an additional debt just to remain competitive. This shift raises important questions about economic stability and fairness. In conclusion, while AI offers innovation and efficiency, it also reinforces global inequality. Wealthy nations and corporations benefit most, while vulnerable communities bear the environmental and labor costs. If AI continues to expand without oversight, these patterns will deepen. To move forward responsibly, we need stronger global regulations, ethical standards, and accountability systems that protect workers and the environment. AI should be a tool for shared progress, not a system that mirrors colonial patterns of exploitation. So basically, what I was basically saying here is that I feel I see what's wrong. I see that it's not just us as humans who use AI, right? Not the daily users who just go on the website, we go use it. Yes, we are wrong, but some of us are not aware of what the problem is. I was never aware of what when I first I have used AI was a thing that came up. I was like, oh, I would like to see what it is. I tried it once and I kept using it until I did my own research. And I was like, how is this what happens? How is it made? And I found out that to cool their system, they use a ton of water over and over to cool these systems, and it droughts certain areas because of this water. And I found out that there's many people who work in these factories and these places to keep this running, and they're not getting paid anything. They're like specifically chosen for profit. The big companies are using them specifically for their profit and their gain. And I felt that was not fair. I s- I kind of came up with the solution last year during my class and during the time we had the discussion that I feel like it's not us as the people, but it should be the companies who should look into what they're doing and look into a different way, a different method as to how they should push AI forward because it is such a great creation. It's amazing thing to have on hand. while it may be very detrimental to the earth, I feel like there's a way around it. We have so much technology. The same way we find a way to create it, there's a way to also find a way around it, making it helpful to us, not just making it a danger. And that's kind of my words and what I have to say.
Thanks so much for that, Pedro. I really appreciate it. I think you're probably the perfect person to talk to, given the kind of different disciplines that are here today. And I want to sort of pick up on a thread that you were talking about. And so I'm really interested in, as it may be clear, of like how people wrestle with these questions of technology in their own lives. And so I hear you wrestling with it, and I'm curious, and that you hadn't known about the sort of AI empire, AI colonialism prior to the class. Um, and I hear you saying it's changed your understanding. I'm curious, has it changed your use at all? Like, are you still using these tools in the same way that you were prior to the class? It sounds like you were sort of still thinking about this, and it's sort of an evolving set of kind of understandings and practices. But I'm curious, yeah, if you are using it differently, again, generative AI technologies, because you're right. Like anytime you open up a music app, right, and you're like having the algorithm will feed you, right? So like that is AI that we encounter all the time, but like versus opening up, Chat GPT or Gemini and interacting with the large language model that way. I'm curious, yeah, how sort of learning about all of these issues has impacted the ways in which you're using or not using, as well as like talking about it with other people. Like, have you been like having these conversations with your peers or with family, and what that looks like?
So, funny thing is, yeah, I would say yes. Definitely, I've like, I'm so aware now. It's kind of like I'm like, I would not like to use it. But I kind of get scared also that when I go do a Google search and I see AI, I'm like, wow, what did I just do? Like, I kind of feel conscious as to like I'm doing something wrong right now in a sense. But I definitely tried my best and hardest to put like ChatGPT out of the way, because sometimes in the past I would do simple things like, um, what what would be a good recipe to cook today? What would be like, I would give like my weight, my height, what would be a good way to schedule a meal plan for myself for the week, to stuff like that. But I have found a way to like go around, just do the research myself. Put in the hard work, like I can't remember her name. I'm sorry with names. I think it was Katie. She said that this was we did it before. It's not original. Like I mean it is like AI is not original. We are the original makers, right? So I simply just did the research and got it myself. I've also found a way to talk to more people about it, because everybody brings up the topic of AI, and even at family events, people who are like older, they think about it and they think like, "Oh my God, it's so good. It's such a good thing. It's such a good incorporation of certain things." And I'm just like, "Right, guys, but kind of what happens and what's the consequence to it." And I kind of like have been talking about it more and more and kind of educating those around me who I can on a daily basis.
You sound like you're about as much fun at a party as I am. Where I'm like, actually, can I say something here? Well, and then the notion of sort of these framings and who we're talking about, I'm curious, and I don't know if there are any administrators in the room, but like at Albany, for example, and maybe in the business, program in particular, what would you say to professors or, faculty who are sort of creating these programs in which you're being asked to use these technologies or encouraged to maybe complicate their thinking or the narratives a little bit? Like, what would be your message to these, again, this question of people in power who can kind of often sort of set the tone of the debate, if not the exact sort of parameters? What would you say to those folks based on what you've learned, the conversations you've had with family, with peers?
So I would say I would practically start by saying I don't think it's a like technically a terrible thing to incorporate into your classroom. I do think you should, as the peer, as the teacher, as the person who is elder, who has a voice, like be able, and who has like a look over everybody. I would say you should be able to say, you should provide, as to like say, to teach the kids, like you should teach them that no, this is not like a good thing. This is what happens if you use this, right? Let's say in the sense that this like it's a professor who doesn't incorporate AI into their daily class. Instead of just being like, "Oh, I don't like AI. I don't agree with AI. I feel like you should actually explain why, as to the AI is this and this and this reason. I don't think AI is good for this reason." And the kids, I feel like the kids will better understand. Now when the kid understands and has a good they catch on and understand what's being said to them, they now share it with somebody else. Oh, like, oh, I learned this today. This about AI is not now. This person knows now. It shares it all around. So I feel like as the professor, depending on what the professor does or what they're teaching, if it's required or not, um, you should simply like share the information about AI. You should simply have a small like intro into the class where you first start the class why you don't believe in AI and why AI is not good for you. But as to those who do use AI, I'm not too sure because if you're like kind of like mandatory to use the AI in the system, I'm not too sure what I would say about that. I'd simply tell them that, is there any way around what you could find to do it? Is there any way that we could, instead of using AI, we could simply do the research ourselves or simply do the hard work ourselves? Because this comes from somebody else and that person could be found without we using AI. We just have to do the research and the hard work ourselves.
Yeah, I appreciate that point of sort of finding a way to opt out and find other ways. As a parent with young children, I've been thinking about what does it mean for my kids to like be in schools in which they're learning through a lot of problematic ed tech in my mind. And I think there's a similar kind of upswell too of caregivers who are pushing back against these technologies, as we see in data center organizing in schools and student organizing. I know we have about, I think, 10 minutes left of the event. And so I want to, again, open up to questions that folks might have for PJ and the kind of points that he's raised. And so I don't know, Stefan, you've got something here in the chat or
Yeah,
others.
I do
Yeah,
agree
who
with
want
what
to.
they said. That is kind of what I'm trying to explain. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to, because this is honestly my own experience. I've caught myself looking at these AI enhanced searches more, and I
Yeah.
realized that when I look up something that I know, like, I can ask Gemini or ChatGPT or whatever to give me like a lesson plan or materials on genre. And because I've done this for a long time, I have the expertise to assess if it's valid or not. But if I'm looking up something that I don't know, like, interestingly, I had some plans that I didn't get into the ground before the snow started in December, and I looked up what I should do with them. And the websites that I looked at told me completely different things, and I was like, I don't want the plans to die. So my hunch was, let's ask an AI, because it's going over hundreds of data points and probably does all the thinking and synthesizing and checking information against each other for me. And I think that's why those AI enhanced searches seem more, not maybe, I don't know what the right word is. I think that's why people are drawn to them, because they give this illusion of well researched, synthesized correctly through the AI, holistic. Um and for me, this plant example was just so fascinating, because I totally gave up. I'm like, I don't know enough about plants and when to put them in the ground to make a decision on my own. So they're in the garage now. And hopefully they're gonna survive.
Yeah, can I respond to that? First, I just wanna thank PJ for, an excellent précis again. Um, yeah, I've been doing some research. There's a fellow named Peter Benson who, is a, cyborg psychologist, and he writes about what he calls the human AI dyad, and refers to AI as a synthetic consensus machine. Um what he addresses is the fact that with synthetic consensus comes like an epistemological model that does not take into account outlying data, right? So consensus is a model for, certain bodies of knowledge, but there are limitations to that, right? So there might be information or knowledge, bodies of knowledge that are not digitized. I immediately think of like indigenous epistemologies and belief systems that may not have um, been accounted for, in an AI model, that are like slipping through the cracks when we rely on knowledge based on synthetic consensus. So I think one of the conversations that maybe needs to be part of any conversation about AI is the kinds of epistemological models that AI supports and those that are not being accounted for, not being addressed. Um, which is, Stefan, for a lesson plan, this may not be as relevant, but I think it's an important consideration for thinking about how knowledge is constructed through AI.
And I would just add that perhaps the answer is not to then go seek out indigenous storytelling and then just load it into a model, right? And
No,
then you think about the work of like Eve Tuck or others who are very much let's
yeah,
refuse
exactly.
these systems of extraction. So I know that's not what you were saying, Sarah, but just wanted to to raise that as like to me that's a red flag of let's just then the answer is more data to these systems.
Sorry. Sorry, we're struggling with tech here. But I absolutely agree. Right, that there are bodies of knowledge that are not digitized, that are, that I'm not saying that they should be, but I'm saying that there's a material that we're missing if we overly rely on AI as a constructor of knowledge.
Can I just quickly add something in relation to Sarah's point? I had read a few years ago a wonderful book on early modeling of kind of AI in web development. And speaking of tech, you have a concept in when you're doing networking where you can take a signal and you amplify it, right, so that it can reach more people. One of the early ways that AI was being used in web development was those top 10 lists at the bottom of websites and stuff like that, top 10 uh, music artists, that kind of a thing. What they were doing was they were using those as models and reifying specific people constantly. So why is Taylor Swift always in that top 10 list? Always the same people. One of the things that I find interesting in relation to this conversation is how in some ways it can amplify our own reification models and continue that that wave throughout the pool constantly so that we reach a point where we almost don't even know anymore who either started it, the problematic reification and removal of other people from these models of information, so that we end up in just this kind of never-ending circle of reification now that can be amplified even larger than we were already aware of.
Yeah, Joe, that makes me also think of what something that Peter Benson addresses, which is that researchers are referring to AI models as sycophants, right? Because they privilege user preferences, often at the cost of accuracy, right? And so I think one of the issues of AI is that we can get deeper and deeper into our own echo chambers, and so um, yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important point as well.
Can I inject the question? And I know time is fleeting, but um, Dr. Logan, you had brought up Dr. Rua Benjamin and this idea of reimagining. I mean, I think Stefan is bringing up this idea. AI is really good at compiling data and processing it very quickly, and that's a big value of it. Um, there's a difference with the generative aspects of it, and um, so I wonder how it sounds to me like when it comes to generative anything, generation, uh, there's really something important about the human individual and the imagination. And this question is also for Pride Joy. I don't know what you thought about the slide about Dr. Rua Benjamin, Pride Joy, but I would love to hear you and Dr. Logan talk about how we can sort of hold AI accountable with our own values. I mean, I think these conversations might get heated, but we can hopefully agree on values that we have. We don't want people to be exploited, their labor to be exploited. We don't want to destroy our world. So why don't we try and figure out a way to make AI do that? It is a tool after all.
Yeah, that's where I would say, I mean, the framing of it's just a tool, right? is important to sort of unpack because it's a tool with a clear ideology. I mean, there's a reason why you see fascist governments using the aesthetics of generative AI. And so for me, I mean, I would echo with what Katie said. I don't think under our current technological capitalist society that there is an ethical way to use generative AI. I think there are important ways, perhaps again, in a situated for a disabled student or like, thinking about other kinds of machine learning, right? And so, maybe to tie in a few threads, there are a number of indigenous communities who are using machine learning technologies to produce language rejuvenation applications. There's one in New Zealand, Tehuka Media. There's one in Michigan that I recently learned about. But these are all systems that are built on notions of data sovereignty, of consent, of built for and with the community. So elders in the community who are still fluent in the indigenous language are invited in to record their stories. These models are then trained. They're small models. This question of scale that I think has sort of underlined a lot of our conversation today is part of it. So I think in that way, and again, that's not to say then that's a model that we export to every community, because I also want to be attend to the ways in which indigenous epistemologies, ontologies have been taken and sort of repurposed by white people in the past um, and currently. And so I think there are these kind of small scale, community based data sovereignty consent forms of machine learning that I think is an invitation to think creatively across a university. What might that look like, rather than let's just partner with OpenAI and create like a wrapper around ChatGPT that then we install on our every device on campus. Um, so I think that's where like the imagination piece for me comes in, and sort of the opportunities around these technologies, but that start with um, people first and foremost.
To just make sure I have the question right, were you asking that what as the people who use AI, what can we do? Is that what you were asking? Like to kind of hold them accountable?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, this idea of reimagining it uh, in different ways that Dr. Logan had just brought up. Um, what would that be to you?
Okay. I okay, so I definitely agree with what he just said, 100%. Everything he said, I agree with it. To add kind of like add on, I would say the way that, like you said, it's incorporated into like the universities and different places and, different areas and how it's brought out. I feel like it has to cater to different. It's kind of like when you write something or when you produce something or market something. What is your targeted audience? I feel like we have to when AI is like created or when AI is rebuilt or whatever it is, it has to cater to every single audience or find a way to make each person understand and what it is capable of. And I feel like from the start, AI should be recreated, rebranded, remade in the sense that it doesn't do such destruction and damage that we as right now should not be currently having this conversation. If you kind of get what I'm trying to say that it shouldn't in the it shouldn't be the fact that we have to think about a way to recreate it, to rebrand it, to reimagine it for anybody. It should be to the point where it's like catered for everybody to understand it, catered to where it comes in a small piece. It doesn't have to be like this big piece that's just like you said, integrated to every computer, integrated to every system and stuff like that.
Thank you. Thank you, Pranjar. Allison, please.
This is fascinating discussion. I have an odd pairing of people in my head. which is Elizabeth Wardle, who's a comp-ret theorist, Karl Marx, we know who he is, and Octavia Butler. And also Dr. Joy Buolamwini, who actually calls generative AI regurgitative AI. It's not generating anything. But so Elizabeth Wardle talks about how AI, specifically for writing, is trying to solve problems that didn't exist. And we're asking the wrong questions, which makes me think of Marx, because if we're thinking about overthrowing capitalism, you have to get to the root problems. And it seems to me that the questions about AI are really questions on the nature of work and the nature of exploitation, right? If AI is so globally pervasive that it's hitting all the continents, that map, um, Dr. Logan, that you showed, like it's pervasive and just almost just intrinsic to all of us. We can't even be on Zoom without being on AI. And that's not a whataboutism so much as how do we tease out the threads? Which brings me to Octavia Butler and actually to the NCTE African American Read-In this past weekend that we put on about Afrofuturism and trying to think, how do we decolonize? What does a decolonialist future look like? How do we decolonize in a way that's anti-racist and anti-colonialist? Like, where do we go from here? So if we're looking at the AI Plus Institute, um, my cat Chicken is getting really excited. If we're looking at the AI Plus Institute, the classes they offer, Intro to AI, Concepts of AI. What if we were to say we would love for you, we demand you to have an ethics of AI, right? Because it's not on the burden of any one unit to explain the escalating damage that AI is creating, right? I mean, personally, I'd like to go back to pre-internet, pre-cell phone. Um, I think a lot of the screens, a lot of the technology that's created convenience that was supposed to give us more time, we never got more time. And what is more valuable in life than time? So big question, which I know we can't answer fully, but how do we decolonize? What does that decolonist future look like?
I mean, I just love the prompt to think about time differently. I mean, I think we heard the word efficiency come up a number of different occasions in this conversation, and how do we, you know, welcome sort of recursive or slow or meandering forms of time in our own work, which again, the institution certainly demands, right, that we produce more and more every year until we get tenure, and then you know, then you can fade away. Um, but so I think that sort of invitation to rethink time as a starting point, I love as a real kind of provocative way to disrupt the sort of capitalist drive for more and more extraction of our labor, and we can muck up those gears a bit through different forms of time. And so that's one initial thought off the top of my head.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead, Stefan, and Susan as well. And um
Yeah. Sorry.
and I just want to say, speaking of time, we are at 10:38, so this was supposed to end at 10:30, and so just be aware of that. Go
I'll
ahead,
I'll
please.
be I'll be quick. But yeah, I think something that struck me when Katie spoke was that she said that there are no I don't remember the exact wording, but there are no practical uses of AI that for things that we couldn't do otherwise. And the whole time issue has been ruminating in the back of my head the entire time because I think, I use Copilot and other AI tools frequently. And it's true, the things that I do with those AI tools, I could be doing myself because I learned how to do them. Um, but, I think in a post capitalist society where everyone is overworked and, mental health is bad, for many people, including myself, some of the AI tools are becoming kind of a relief. As in, I have a huge to do list today, and I would rather outsource this right now because it's a tedious task and not deal with it. But yeah, I think the illusion has been given that the AI tools or AI revolution is going to give us much more time, so we can, go outside and touch some grass and go take a stroll by the river. And I don't think that's happening because we're filling the time that we now have through the AI tools with other stuff. And one thing that's been bothering me is how the quote unquote tech bros like see this playing out. So, but apart from just AI tools making companies money, I'm always wondering like what's the end game? When Elon Musk said what 2-3 months ago, don't worry about your retirement in 20 years, the AI is going to just make retirement money obsolete. I'm like, what's the deal? Are we saving up to buy an Android and then the Android is going to go to work for us, and is it like a franchising system where we're renting an Android that's doing all the work for us and we can relax? So I think in terms of where the industry is going and how that impacts us as people, but also as teachers, there is a lot of weird ambiguity, and I don't know to what extent these ideas are marketing or real goals of how Elon Musk and Sam Altman want to transform society, but it's something that I keep thinking about, and I don't have an answer. I just wanted to throw that out there.
I just wanted to say on the subject of capitalist time imperatives that I recommend looking at some of the disability justice scholars that have been addressing this through the notion of crip time. And I'll put in the chat one book, Margaret Price's book, Crip Space Time, is a recent book on that. It talks about other things, but it does definitely talk about the disability justice-based critique of capitalist space-time imperatives, and also Price, who is a disabled scholar, and Stephanie Kirschbaum, who is one of her collaborators, have a number of articles that they've published on ways to do academic work when you do not and cannot um, comply with those imperatives. And when in some cases, because they do a lot of interview projects for their scholarships, ways to partner with their subjects who also can't, and to do that in ways that are more humane. So I just wanted to bring that into the conversation.
Thank you for that as well. I want to make sure that we, well, say thank you to Pride Joy as well. Thank you to Dr. Logan. And just make sure that you also got everything out of this conversation, Pride Joy, that that you wanted. I'm really happy for your kind of alternative perspective, juxtaposed to Katie's.
I have one last thing. If you could go to the chat and click on that sign-in form, that'd be great. I have everyone's attendance through the Zoom attendee list. But filling out the form is going to help us communicate more effectively after the event. So we're going to have a post-event survey. You need to use your Albany credentials to sign into that form.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody in WCI for helping out with this. Of course, thank you, Dr. Logan. Thank you for framing our discussion, Allison. Yeah.
Thanks again, everybody. I hope the snow isn't too too many feet to make life unlivable. Thanks again,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.